if they want.
Wednesday, October 23rd, 2024, we're here for the budget review. So we'll come back from recess, and we are here with the auditor's office. Welcome.
Thank you.
Going to reconvene the meeting at this point.
That computer not cooperating with you, Tim? You want me to come over and rough it up for you a little bit?
It's not here.
There we go.
All right, what's the plan? We'll just go over what we've asked for, or
Well, hopefully you're not asking for anything.
not much?
If there's any major changes on the revenues, I mean, we've been talking about that some. There's nothing really significant. It looks like on the revenue side, it looks like we're up slightly from the previous year.
Will you talk just a little closer to your mic, please?
Looks like we're up slightly from the previous year at 311,150 compared to 293,432 last year. Auditor recording fees, we had up 10,000. The amount that we billed for accounting service to public works up 10,000. Some of these are billings to HAPO and RV Park as well. Yeah, not a whole lot of, I mean, mostly the same on the revenue side, and then on the expenditure side, there's a few changes. The biggest of those, the travel one, and most of that is related to the WFOA conference being in Bellevue next year. It was in Tri-City, or is in Yakima for 2024, and it's in Bellevue next year, so it's a bit more expensive for travel and hotel over there.
That stands for Washington Finance Officers Association.
Nice save there, Jeff.
Yeah, revenue isn't changing really dramatically. We did increase the recording fee a little bit. It's highly rate sensitive. And so even though rates at least dipped for a while for like mortgage rates, it's hard to say going into this next year what's going to happen. Refinances probably aren't going to be flooding in even with rate reductions. It'd have to be pretty significant for that to happen. And so we're really looking at mainly purchases driving that. And we're limited by inventory, but we'll see what inventory looks like.
But you can see, like in 2022, it was 136,000, so it's down a fair amount. But that's just, with interest rates as high as they were and everything. Unfortunately, we're not expecting quite that activity anymore.
Jeff, you had talked about during our fiscal year 2024, look that licensing, though, fees generally are down.
Licensing is the 101-080
Okay,
budget,
great.
and that, yeah, so we do have, so we're down, we have that going down from 860,000 to 830,000, so a slight dip. The first line there, the motor vehicle line, that's one that we collect in our office. That's the activity here, and then we have our sub-agents, Westside 1 and 2. The Westside 2 we have going down slightly from 270 to 250. We also get some quarterly, we get a remittance from the state. We have that flat 135 to 135. But yeah, there definitely has been some impact, I think, to to interest rates being as high as they were, where we just weren't seeing the same activity that we had previously.
I do want to draw your attention to that remittance, and I know we've covered this, but it makes sense to cover it every year. The state actually relinquished to all of the counties the audit requirements for the subagents. And when they did that, it's a miracle, but they also sent money along for the counties to be able to afford and pay for that function. And so that has been coming in, and we have been doing the audits of those subagents. So that's what that money is supposed to be for. It goes into the general fund, but, you know, I don't know. I just want to make sure that that's what that was for. It's very easy for, you know, things to kind of disappear into the pot. And at this point, we're not, you know, asking for any of it, but I do want to let the board know that that's why that occurred and why we get that money now.
Is that underneath the 101,080?
It's this 341-48001. Yeah, it's in the 101-080. And it's the 341-48001 line, motor vehicle state funds.
Again, as I think Eric mentioned this, but I mean, you know, if depending on what comes out of these initiatives and the state level flows, I mean, sometimes they'll adjust that on us too in the future. They'll take it back or cut it or whatever they'll do. But at this point, that money's been coming in for a number of years.
Some pretty minor changes on the expenditure side in the motor vehicle department. Office supplies up slightly. Just inflation once again going up, so there's some increases on that.
So, Matt, do you think that our courage staying open during COVID is wore off now and they're staying in Benton County to license their vehicles? Because we were way up at one time.
I mean, my understanding during that time period, they were closed and we weren't. So
Right.
they had, I mean, people wanted to get their work done, so they came over. And so I think it just goes back to kind of the convenience traffic flows at this point.
Especially if the traffic across the bridge right now.
Right.
Understandable.
If there's not any questions on the auto license anymore, we can move on to the elections.
Yep.
Jeff, I know you're excited to talk about this, I think, but I mean, this department highly dependent on how many elections we hold. So, you know, and we recover essentially everything other than our portion of the elections. So as elections go away, if we plan for four and an election doesn't end up happening, then we don't have that expenditure anymore, but we lose the revenue as well. So revenues and expenditures go hand in hand in this department.
I guess the only thing that I would add to that is, let's say we don't have an election, that time is used for voter registration. There's always voter registration work that we do. And since we are the election department for these other municipalities, we're the ones that do it for them. The cities and the county pay for voter registration. And so during those times when there isn't an election, then we bill voter registration for our staff time. So, in those particular cases, the county may end up paying a little bit more than if there was a county-wide election by another entity, but it's not a major amount. You're basically covering salaries at that point and sharing those with the cities.
And when he says that the county pays for all of it, so it's a matter of a reduced amount of recovery. So we pay for everything. I mean, the county is statutorily required to provide this service, and we're able to bill more out or bill less out. But no matter what, we are paying, but we're paying anyway. I mean, so.
When some jurisdiction within Franklin County puts something on the ballot, do they pay the cost that the county incurs for that?
Yes.
Yeah, they
Yeah, and if there's
pay a
more.
proportion.
Yeah, and so in a case like in the general election, there's multiple jurisdictions or municipalities, for example, that are participating in that. So there's I can't verbalize the formula, but we take all those costs and it's weighted and attributed and evenly and fairly billed.
Adequately reimbursed?
Yes, it's by registered voter in
Yeah.
their.
Including the county as a.
Including the county, yes.
Right.
The county is factor, bless you.
I mean, we had an interesting one this year where in the primary, it went to Connell. Ended up with the only one that went to 3, and it was an eye-opener for them because they ended up for that one race, I forget it was, anyway, we worked hard to try to make, I mean, we
So
worked and reworked the
Describe it
formula.
again.
So,
Describe again what you're talking about in Connell.
well, so what I'm talking about is when, it depends on how many participate in each election on how it'll be allocated out, and it's allocated out by registered voters. So when we say that a large participant, in this case, maybe the school district of Pasco, will not be responding or will not be putting an issue on, then, you know, and then the smaller district, if they decide to do it, if a smaller school district does, they will bear a lot heavier overhead cost that's built into the formula. And so with Connell, they had 3 going into the primary, right? And then, yeah, and so they ended up, you know,
3 elections.
Three
three
candidates.
Three
Three
candidates, I'm sorry. I make assumptions because I've been doing this for so long. They had 3 candidates, which required them to have, participate in that election, and they were one of the only ones. And so it was probably one of the largest election bills they've ever received, so.
So typically in that situation, if the county had a primary also simultaneously, that would have probably cut in half the cost of Connell's.
Now I understand.
Connell,
Now I
and if the
understand.
fire district had, it would have been a third, and let's say, I don't know what other district is out there, but if another district had been out there, that could have cut it down in a quarter. They had to pay 100% of the postage and mailing, et cetera, because they were the only entity that had something on the ballot.
It's almost like saying 100 of whatever cost $100 and 200 cost $103. It's not the overall cost. It's the setup and preparation. Yeah, I understand. Thanks.
And of course, we minimize that as much as possible, so we don't like deploy 6 people only working on that one race. So they're working on voter registration, so half the staff was already working on voter registration at that point.
So it looks like we have we have it broken up by election in 2025. So we have planned a February, the 2502. The 25 indicates the year. 02 is the month. So we have a February, August, and November election planned, and then this is the revenue that we're planning from that. But once again, that is highly dependent on whether an election is held or not, as to whether we would recover that, and as well as and how many elections ultimately. And then there's a fourth one down here, which is the voter registration. But you can see the amounts for each of those that's in there. Filing fees stayed about the same as the previous year. So ultimately the expenditures were adjusted to reflect what the revenues were, and so expenditures changed because of the change in plans of how many elections there are going to be, and so that's what you're seeing here is on these lines. I mean, there was a reduction of $50,000 in printing and binding, reduction of $35,000 in contracted service ballots. It looks like it's mostly a net decrease of $90,000 that we're looking to on the expenditure side. I don't know if there's any more questions on the election department. There's a lot of, forecasting as far as what elections are going to even happen. You don't always know. And so,
But it's all reimbursed, so
Yeah.
it's a break even.
other than Franklin County's portion, yes.
Right. Yeah, if we have a portion.
Well, and you will, just from, like you said, there's two parts. There's elections, and then there's maintenance of the voter registration database, so.
How often do we go through that? Do we go through and clean up our voter?
Well, we follow the statutes that apply as far as management of, the participants, and it's pretty well laid out in WAC and RCW.
Yeah, I mean, it's continually. It's not
But
like.
it's continual, yeah,
Yeah,
it's
I mean,
just-
every day. So, if somebody, they're going through obituaries. We're getting a list from our county coroner. We have family members that notify us of
Well,
people
Department
who've
of
passed.
Health.
I'm just using that as one example. And so the important thing is if somebody has a family member that moves, the family member needs to, the person who moved actually needs to change their registration. So the mom can't, get upset that their kid's still getting a ballot at their house when their kid hasn't changed their voter registration. We can't just change it without the voter doing it.
I don't know
So-
if you listened to the meeting this morning, but I had a neighbor call me, and they were concerned because their ballot, his ballot, husband and wife, had Commissioner Mullen on it. Her ballot didn't have any commissioner on it. I know the family. And I said, well, I think your wife didn't update her address but it's coming to their address. That's what was confusing to them. They mailed it to that address, but she's still registered underneath her old address. And I said, she's just got to go in and update her address.
Yeah.
I encourage the people to do that. If they've moved or if they're not getting the same ballot as the person in the house, they need to look and find out whose address isn't correct with the ballot.
Yeah, it's not too late. If this don't vote that ballot, come in,
She could come
Change it.
in and change it out.
change it,
Okay.
get a new ballot.
I'll call them back.
Yep.
All right.
This is the Auditor O&M Fund. Jeff had some materials for this, I do believe.
Well, it's there.
recording,
Yeah, what we did this a few years ago because, there's so many pieces to a recording fee and so many RCWs that dictate where each portion of that fee goes. We thought it would be a good idea just to have that. So I'm going to share it with you.
Yeah, and I don't know if you guys have this, but we have a compiled description of the non-major special revenue funds and a description of each. And so the Auditor's O&M Fund is a fund it's a surcharge recorded per recorded instrument that is recorded, and it's intended to fund the preservation of historical documents. And then we list the RCW that empowers it. But that copy there you just got was when they, I believe this really started, maybe Eric can speak to this more than me, but I think when Iman passed the $30 car tabs, it reduced one of the conduits by which to fund different projects that the legislature likes to do. So now I think we're up to, I think Jeff said today, $300.
It's highlighted there for you. So-
$303 worth of fees associated with the first page of any recorded document.
There are some exceptions, or there's some.
Clearly,
Yeah,
yeah.
there are some exceptions, but any like real estate document, for example, $303.50 to start. So anybody refinancing their home, purchasing a home, anything like that, and there's other documents that are included in that, but it's gotten very spendy. And so as you go down this, you're gonna see most of it relating to big ones are to housing,
yeah.
homelessness.
Different programs.
Yeah.
I would draw, I mean, to your attention to the, right there at the top is the historical document preservation, $5. That first dollar is what used to be referred to as the commissioner dollar. That's what goes into the historical preservation. And then obviously there's $2 goes into the state centennial fund, and the state will redistribute that for document preservation. And then of course the O&M fund gets, the auditor O&M gets the other $2 for county level document preservation. And that feeds through to this 600, whatever the balance, what is it now?
We're estimated to start the year with 576,000, and with the revenues next year, 654,100 is what we're anticipating.
And I do know the clerk had approached the O&M board and had a large project. This project, I mean, this fund is important in that it funds the recording software, and that's important for the county, just because when you have updates in equipment and software and that kind of thing, it can come out of this fund instead of falling to the current expense fund. So it's prudent to, I mean, nobody has come in for any big document preservation projects, so we looked at this and it looks doable, but as you get down there, you need to keep that beginning fund balance available for updating the either software updates or just complete system, or adding components. There's been interest or talk at times regarding some of the stuff that goes on with mortgages. And so there's different stuff we can look at there, whether you want to pay for additional software, packages that will help alert people and that kind of thing. So that's the kind of stuff that's optional that are available, and why you'd want to keep this fund from going, to zero.
Well, and I would say that, when I came on board, and Matt is very fee sensitive, and you start looking at all these fees, and I was a banker for 17 years. And so I dealt a lot in the recorded deed document arena, and with many, many clients having to pay those fees. And so we do everything we can to make sure that we give people access to their records, and we don't charge them for it. If you look around the state, I think we probably have one of the best track records of, if somebody wants to look up a document, they can look it up at Franklin County, and there's no charge to look it up. If they want a certified document, it's $3. But you go to places like Yakima, because I have family there and I've had to look up some stuff. If you go in person, they give it to you for free. If you try to look it up online, they charge you $7 a day to use their system. So we provide the access. Almost all of our documents from the recording department are available online, and they can look those up and have access to them. So that is a positive thing for the citizens here to be able to take advantage of.
And I suspect you might have used some of these resources to provide the technology to be able to do that then as well. Yeah. So, yep. And the board did have a discussion about the 300,000. I know. So,
yeah.
And that's when we started talking a little bit about this. We also talked about the committee that you just established and some things on historic preservation. So, these funds have kind of been bantered about throughout the week so far.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
There is one other item that we can't include in the budget because we don't know, but the state does have an opportunity. We missed the cutoff for this last year, but coming up in February, I think they're going to be opening it up again for a $50,000 grant, which we're going to apply for and hopefully get that to assist with the clerk's big project. And so, again, this money is it's rolling over and it's staying in there for use. And so once the clerk's done with that, we've got all of our documents scanned. So at this point, our primary, besides equipment and software, is we microfilm. We're required to microfilm everything. That's why time you record something, it's got to be a specific format. You can't have pictures or color because it just turns into a blob when you microfilm it. So that's the reason for it. So we're all cut up. Everything that is recorded is sent to the digital archives. So people can order from all over the United States through digital archives too. So, multiple sources.
So Matt, will you remind me of the Historical Society? You're the chairman?
Well, you guys established the board, and it was really great. It's going well. I mean, it's progressing now. But it's the grants for historical preservation in Franklin County. And so it's Dwayne Davidson had established this, and it was long running over in Benton, and it's a great model. You do a call for the grants, there's applications, they're scored, and then they're awarded.
But who's on the board?
Well, and so the board's made up of the county administrator, the treasurer, the auditor, and then two members selected for 2-year terms. And so we're fully.
Members are selected by the other three, correct?
Right, right.
Not by the board, but by those other three.
That's right. And now you guys ultimately approve, you guys have approval, so it's ultimately you're actually selecting, but they're presented to you after having gone through a process, so. And so it's moving along, and and again, there's quite a bit of money in there initially, and it's going to be good. So we'll have that. I think we're going to do the call. The plan was to put out first part of next year and get some things awarded for local historical preservation. And again, that's the dollar at the top. The grant we're going to put in for, we believe, comes out of that state centennial $2. And then, of course, we have the money that stays here in the other auditor O&M. And that's why even when you guys were doing some document preservation back here, it's really appropriate to have document preservation come out of the O&M and have that $1. I mean, it's your discretion, but really for the historical preservation in the county at large.
And everybody may know, but just to be clear, the committee that's being talked about is not the auditor O&M fund. It's the supplemental preservation fund, the 103 fund.
Right.
And there actually is an auditor O&M fund that was a predecessor to even myself being here. The commissioners had established an auditor O&M that's made up of elected officials, anybody that's eligible for it. And there's everyone can vote so that those funds can be allocated and not kind of, apparently there was some disagreements with my predecessor and how the money was used. And so at that time, the commissioners established a fund internally, actually not a fund, a board internally, and then they vote as well. And those projects are presented for approval by the Board of Commissioners. What do we have left? Election revolving, is that it?
Yep, election revolving.
So election revolving, I can let, Jeff can speak to it more, but it says it's basically election revolving fund is established to periodically replace the county's election equipment and software. Funds that are used to purchase equipment are reimbursed from local municipalities and agencies that hold elections. So it's the participants, it's almost, I mean, it almost sounds like an ER&R fund, right? Which is, funds that are collected to replace the system in the future.
Yeah, and so again, there is a formula that we collect as well, because we are the other jurisdictions or municipalities, we are their elections department, so we've got to be able to make sure we have a location to perform elections. We got to make sure that we have the equipment to do elections. So if we ever need to do upgrades, or if we needed to change our system, unless the state came in and said, you're going to one system, and they're going to pay for it, we're responsible to do that. So a little bit of each election, we bill a portion, and that goes into this particular fund. And that money is utilized for the purposes in the fund, which is typically going to software, equipment, et cetera. It's a primary.
I do appreciate last year, you guys, we did move an employee out of this fund that was a legacy accounting practice, is what I would call it. And I do appreciate that over the years, this board has moved towards, kind of legitimizing, as we've grown, legitimizing how we conduct our accounting. So in this case, there used to be an employee that came out of this fund, or a portion of their pay. And, anyway, but that was,
To that end, could you talk to me about how the building, the cost of the building, cost of structure, cost of that gets factored into, or does it get factored into the overall cost we charge for conducting the elections then as well?
Yeah, we don't have a full allocation plan, so we use 10%
Okay.
is how we recover that.
it should be noted that I don't want to call it a controversy, but it felt controversial to me. The annex, the discussion about the attempts to maybe liquidate the annex building and everything that went on there. If we got to the point, if it made sense to begin to do some longer range planning, it makes sense to me that this fund would be involved, right? Because of the, whatever the location costs are. But again, I bring that up only to say that if there's some kind of a discussion by this board about, capital investment or location for the services that are provided in the existing annex, this would be part of it, but it was a little more complicated than what was happening, so.
And we have received some election security grants that have helped out. I think helped out the county with some security issues.
Yeah.
And the 2026, it looks like it's the last year that grant's approved. But that's $80,000 approximately that we're looking to bring in for 2025.
So I can speak to that really quickly. It came on the back of the 2020 election, and there was a lot of, I think that's our third year, is that right? I think it's our third year, but it comes in, it's principally IS, and it is used for, our network's security. So it has been helpful to elections, and by extension, the county has benefited, but it's for elections. So I'm not sure. I'm sure IS can explain the impact of that, and when that goes away, what that, if that goes away or when it goes away, what the impact will be to the county.
If there, I don't know if there are any more questions, but that was all of the auditor budgets.
The election cost for cities, trying to see it up there. I'm looking at it on mine. How do I tell you which line it is?
Are you talking about expense or?
Are you looking at this, election cost
Expense
cities?
or revenue?
It's just not showing anything budgeted for 25, and there was 100,000 budgeted for 24.
I think we just decided that there's no real distinction between the 341-45-000 and 341-45-001. I think at one point it was decided to track it separately, but ultimately there wasn't any real benefit to doing that, and so we have it all in one line now. And there's no distinction on with the state auditor's office as far as those two separate lines. It was just internal tracking.
And that was one of those legacy things that, some of this, as we came on board, we just continued to roll with what was there, and we asked more and more questions like, why are we doing this? And not that it was wrong before, it's just there wasn't a need to do it. So we're trying to make it more simplified if we can.
That helps, thanks.
Director, is that it?
Thank you.
No, thank you. Unless anybody has any other questions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Matt.
What's the total request?
It's an overall decrease of $85,205 for the current expense departments, auditor, auto license, and elections.
Good job.
It's either a good job or you over allocated last year. Keep that in mind.
Or you overadd last year.
That's a scary conversation right there.
85,000, what was it again?
$85,205.
205. Thank you.
Thank you. So do we want to move ahead to Kyle Sullivan and Lisa Erickson, or do we have to go in order?
No, yeah, you can move ahead, yeah. We ready? Yeah.
Yep, we're ready for you. We'll just skip over us. That way you don't have to wait any longer.
Nice to see you all.
Yes, good afternoon.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Sounds like things are going smooth. Teresa gave me a call to see if we could come over a little bit early, so that's usually a good sign.
Yeah, that is.
Hang on a second while we make the transition electronically.
Kyle, I just want to make sure I didn't ruffle any feathers, but all these meetings were getting canceled, and I went down to the vet center, and I couldn't get anybody to respond, phone call or knocking on the door, and
Yeah, did you get John's email?
I did.
Okay, yeah.
We're
And
good.
Yeah, and
And
so
you guys are going to come in and,
we're gonna come in. I have a date picked. John and I met last week, and so what kind of threw us for a little bit of a loop is our current VSO is our second VSO. The original, and what confuses it is our first VSO's name was John too. And so he had an opportunity he lives in Prosser, and so he had an opportunity to get a job in Prosser. And so he left, and so then right kind of on the heels of us planning on coming over and presenting, what he'd been doing over the course of the year. And so we hired the current John, and he started in May or June. And so it kind of put off us coming to report.
and the board members all expired.
They did,
Yeah.
and so we've been in the process of recruiting, if you will. I mean, soliciting applications for membership, and so that's actually coming next week. So we'll reconstitute the board in the meeting next week.
Is Scotty going to be a part
Yes.
of it?
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, my thanks to the previous board. They were
Yes.
great. And they were real instrumental in kind of moving the whole VSO position forward. And then I think we kind of lost, once we got that was the big project for a year and a half. And once we got that, then I think life got in the way, and it was difficult when we were scheduling meetings, and they'd done their 2 years, and so it was just a matter of trying to solicit additional applicants to see who would be agreeable to continuing to serve. And so we've got some good selections, and like I said, we'll get that before you all next Wednesday, and then we'll schedule a meeting and kind of get rolling. We have some they're not pressing issues that I want to go over with them, but I think one of the things we've learned from some state meetings that we went to is maybe the benefit, the total dollar per 12 month that we're allowing for the veterans needs to be increased.
Yes.
It's been the same dollar amount since I've been in this job, and everything, of course, is more expensive
Inflation.
now. And so that'll be something but I want to talk with our advisory board about that before bringing any policy change before this board. And so that'll be something probably coming either later in 24 or early 25.
Good. I miss meeting with our vets.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna get it back up and running. It was, like I said, the problem was we put out feelers, and then we just didn't get any applicants. And so then we had to be more direct and go to different agencies and saying, hey, do you have anyone that's willing to serve? 2-year stint, and then that got us some people that were interested.
What is John's last name?
Penny.
Penny?
Yeah. And so so when we present in December, I think, like I said, it'll be the first or second week of December. He's been working with WDVA to come up with stats that will be meaningful to this board to talk about, the number of claims that he's processed and what that means from a benefit to the veteran, but also to the community. Those are real federal dollars that are coming and being spent in our community, and when we met and talked about it, I was impressed with the dollar amount. So I'm looking forward to coming and talking with you guys about it, and I think his numbers are from, he's not a I'm going to toot my own horn kind of guy, and so I said, well, that's okay, I'll do that. And so he got good praise from WDVA about the number of applicants the applications that he's been processing and the revenue that's being brought back. Again, not just to the vet, but to the community. So we'll touch base on all that here in December.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I think do we need a 5-minute, or we'll just,
We're going to pause for 5 minutes so
or
he
we
can
can just
step
keep
out, but we
talking
can keep
about
talking.
this. This is good stuff. I'm getting what I wanted to hear.
Yeah, yeah.
So he's brought in a lot of federal money then.
Yes, yeah, and he's actually the Tucker Flood. That's the name of our representative at WDVA, and he came down and spent a whole day with John. One of the things, and I think, I don't know what time you went over to the vet center. One of the things I had a conversation with John about that I wasn't aware of with our previous VSO is that the vet center's hour of operation don't align with the county work week. And so our previous VSO was starting to meet with clients at 8 in the morning, and it was just him and the person he was seeing. And I told him I didn't want him in the building by himself with someone, it's just it's just to protect him.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the things I talked with John Penny about, and also trying to coordinate, and there we may have a discussion about a second VSO coming up, but we won't talk about that today. But one of the things that would coincide with that, and one of the things I've talked with John about trying to do, is more outreach. And so for some of those, where it's harder, and we talked even recently about, okay, well, maybe what we need to do is there's something we can coordinate with the cities in the more rural areas like Connell and Prosser and Benton City, where maybe 1 or 2 days a month, we get the word out that we're going to be at the city hall, or the library, or what, we can work something out with the cities where we can get some space, and he goes up and meets with vets, so that they don't have to come down here to meet with him. We also talked about like reaching out to some of our older vets that maybe have a little bit difficulty getting into the vet center, and he's done some. He started to coordinate with the Richland Seabach to get some space over there, so he's not kind of landlocked to one facility where we have him at different days at different times even. Again, I don't want him in the building seeing people if there's no one else in the building, and so that's one way to kind of work around that. But John's a good talker. Anytime you want to talk,
Is he?
He'll sit down and you won't even have to say anything. He'll keep you entertained.
And he's a veteran,
He is.
and he served in
The Marines, I believe.
Marines in Iraq. And
I'm not certain.
I'll find out.
Yeah,
I'll sit down and talk to him.
yeah.
That's
So,
awesome.
He's a
Well,
good guy.
I'm so glad that everything's running smoothly. We'll get that board reestablished and start getting back together.
Yep.
And I agree. I think our amounts need to go up with the
Yeah.
inflation, the way it's hit. We need
Yeah.
to help these
Yeah, it
veterans.
was something, quite frankly, that we should have thought about it, but it wasn't anything even on my radar until again, we participate in these state meetings and and we talk about, you know, what we're doing and what other counties are doing, and it's real helpful to you know, to hear what other counties are doing, and that kind of brought that to the forefront, and it's like, oh, okay, yeah, we do need to take a look at that, and we're gonna try, because we try and mimic Franklin County's policy with Benton County's policy, so it's not confusing for the veterans.
Right.
I'm in the process of kind of doing the same thing with Benton County that we did with Franklin County. I've just not got anything scheduled yet with the agenda to reconstitute their board, but I'm gonna try and get a kind of a bi-county advisory board meeting together too, so we can talk about things.
This second VSO will be shared with both counties again.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, and like I said, we're not. I didn't mean to throw that out there. What I wanted to do first was have John come and present to you and be able to explain.
Give us the numbers. Give us what he's signed up, because I know that there's a lot of vets. And
Yeah.
I know there's people out there that are needing help.
Yep.
So
Yeah, and he'll be able to articulate better than I can, kind of where he feels that we're missing the boat, and what a second VSO would be able to do.
I think we can get started, can't we? Because I know that we'll get until 2:30, and we don't want to lose Eric.
Yeah, let's move on.
Okay. And so, how would you like me just to start talking about what the purpose of the fund is, and
Sure.
and then have questions each fund, or how we go about that?
Let's do
that'll
that.
work good.
Okay. So just as a reminder, the Affordable Housing for All fund, it's based off of just retaining a portion of the state sales tax and using it for housing services. It was just an opportunity for local jurisdictions, instead of sending all our state money, all of our local money to the state, they allowed for a portion of it to be retained locally. And when this was one where the city of Pasco, in Benton County, all of the cities in the county pooled resources. In Franklin County, all of the county and all of the cities, with the exception of Pasco, pooled resources and have the county collecting the revenue. City of Pasco decided to do their own thing with it, and there are a lot of housing related costs that we can use this funding for. It doesn't generate a great deal of revenue each year. Originally, in talking with when it was being developed, talking with stakeholders, talking with Keith Johnson was here at the time. A lot of the feeling was using it for capital investments, and so that's part of why there haven't been any expenses. Is the $165,000 in today's world, from a capital standpoint, doesn't do a whole lot. And so this fund, and there's one other fund that we'll talk about here in a minute, oftentimes the steering committee opts to let it generate revenue in the hopes, for several years, in the hopes that when we do an RFP, we can provide coordinate on a larger project. And so that's kind of where we've been at
Well,
with this.
Kyle, does Benton County have the same fund too?
We do.
And how much do they have in their fund?
Well, there's significantly more money in Benton County's fund. There were things that happened with this, and so
My thought process is this: we were approached this morning about Elijah Homes, and is this something that could apply to that?
I'm not sure what I'll tell you in in the other fund, in the Affordable Housing Fund, which is based off of a document recording fee, we have provided assistance to Elijah Family Homes for capital projects in the past.
Okay.
And so, without knowing what they had suggested, if they have capital expenses, if they're looking at purchasing another home.
No, they're building. They're going to build homes, and they gave me the location, and it's in Pasco.
So the parameters on this, are pretty. it's pretty broad. It has to serve people that are at or below 60% of the area median income. And rents have to be aligned with what HUD determines as fair market rent for the county. And outside of that, you know, it can be used for you know, someone wanting to purchase a house. It can be like home ownership, those kinds of things. It's for capital expenses for rental properties. An example, and again, this is treated very similar to our affordable housing fee fund. And so an example of a project that had been supported previously with the Affordable Housing Fund was the land acquisition for Bishop Skillstad Commons. And so it was, it was like $143,000 or something like that, the Catholic Charities used to purchase. It was a private land purchase. And so this and the Affordable Housing Fund, we have a steering committee with representation from the cities and the county. Historically,
Is that Benton County and Franklin County?
they're
Is that-
separate
so they're
separate
separate.
funds.
Okay.
Yeah, and historically what we've
And are
done,
there two separate committees?
there are.
Okay, so Benton County has its own, Franklin County has its own steering committee.
They do.
As well. And
Benton County has already done this with Elijah Homes over in Benton County?
I don't recall, it was a few years ago, and I don't recall if it was a Benton County or a Franklin County one. Typically, what we've done when I've had somebody interested in accessing these funds is I tell them if you're looking at property in Franklin County, you would apply for the 2060 for apply for the Franklin County Fund. If you're looking at a property in Benton County, then you would pursue that
Well, they were
fund.
here this morning and they presented, and they haven't even got it before the planning commission. So they're looking at doing this. They already have the spot picked out.
This would be a perfect opportunity. Is it like, is the service going to be something like
Mobile?
transitional housing or?
transitional housing, this is, I think the board heard both, I think from two different really facets this morning. One from Elijah, their group, which was really talking about a transitional housing strategy, conjunction with treatment for behavioral health, largely addiction. But then also we had a conversation around the work that's being done in the Columbia Valley Center for Recovery. In that, about the potential, one of the potential uses of some of the unused space will be, again, potentially transitional housing to support those coming out of that facility potentially as well. So I think the board probably in the housing sector probably needs to, hone in, but also hear from the steering committee. But it seems like transitional housing is one of the components that they've heard a lot about lately.
Well, and I'm very for transitional housing. I think when you have people with a behavioral health disorder that if they're either being released from residential SUD treatment or let's say the state psych hospital, and they're coming back into the community, having a supported setting for them to come into makes all the difference in them staying in recovery. And so
96% rate of,
it's huge. Yeah, it's the recidivism rate is very low when if you have someone coming out of inpatient drug treatment and they go back to the environment that they were in that led to that's not going to work. You have a safe and secure center facility housing opportunity where they've got supports, they've got maybe a case manager that's going to make sure they get to their court appointments or their treatment appointments. That's giving them all the tools that they need to stay stable.
just know this, that we'll probably, I'll give Troy Woody a call and tell him to reach out to you.
Definitely.
Okay.
And just curiosity, and this, I'm not trying to lead the question. So Pasco utilizes its own resources independently of these.
They do.
What's the effort for us to assure that the unincorporated residents and the rural residents are accessing these resources. And I'm not sure that's a direction for the board. I'm just trying to suggest that if Pasco, which is 80% of the population, is doing activities and functions inside Pasco, are these resources that we should be thinking about what's happening for the rest of the population?
Yeah, and I think very specifically to this fund, maybe less so for the other one, but because Pasco's not Pasco is taking their money and doing their own thing.
Which is
Almost 100%, I would say this should be for the other areas, for the rural jurisdictions. With our other fund that we'll talk about here in a little bit. So when we constitute the steering committee, you know, it's usually been the county administrator for the county, and then I'll reach out to the cities for a name to who would represent them on the steering committee, and most of the time it's only the county administrator and a representative from Pasco. Every now and then we'll get someone from Connell, but not usually. And so I send out invitations to Mesa, to Colotus, to Connell, to Pasco for the other one, and we don't typically get a lot of response. And so what ends up happening is, you know, their projects are advocated for by the people that are in the room, and I can't recall a time when there has been a rural project that's been presented. Part of the problem is this is more about, you know, $165,000 isn't going to be able to get very far. But for the example, in a situation like Bishop Skillstead, that's a multi-million-dollar complex, and this would purchase the land. And oftentimes when they're applying for other funding, local commitment.
layering that.
Yeah, and they're usually scored applications, competitive applications, and so if there's local funding tied to it, they get bonus points typically, so it helps their case bringing in other, you know, housing trust fund dollars, and I think, you know, some of the housing authorities will use tax credit opportunities, and so it makes them be able to work on a larger scale.
Thanks.
But the short answer to your question, I feel like I get long-winded sometime, is Pasco has their money and is using it for Pasco. This $165,000, I think, should be used outside of Pasco.
Okay, that's good advice,
Yeah.
thanks. So we'll have Troy Woody get a hold of Pasco.
There you go. Well, we do have another fund. We'll talk about some of the challenges that I've had with administering that fund as well, but we'll get to that when we
Yeah,
when
and
we
I'm
get to
not
it.
suggesting it. I mean, there's no question that, you know, our recovery center will be, you know, within the urban area. Maybe it's right for the transitional housing to be there supporting that as well. I'm not suggesting it, but I'm just really cognizant that, you know, that residents throughout the county need services, and
Yeah.
it's not always convenient to come into
No, I agree.
the area.
Point.
So,
Well, and especially all the stuff up in Connell with Lamb Weston and whatnot, those people are in need right now, so.
okay. Go to Veterans Assistance.
Okay. So the Veterans Assistance Fund, obviously we pay 50% of the VSO's salary and benefits out of this, but there are also the services that are eligible for that eligible veterans are allowed, and so you'll see them, you know, in each category. That'll be another thing that we look at. I know you know, I'll have a conversation with the advisory committee when our initial meetings. This is all of the allowed expenses are in policy that the board has signed off on. Anytime we have a discussion about adding an additional benefit, it's that we discuss it with the advisory board. In most situations, the advisory board, because again, they're veterans and they have a kind of a pulse on the veteran needs in the community. They'll bring those to me and we'll discuss them. If there's something that, and of course we run it through legal to make sure that, whatever they're proposing is something that legally we can do. If it is, then I would add it to the policy, present it to the board. What I would do in advance is send you an email, kind of each individually explaining, here's what I'll be bringing before the board, and then I'll bring the policy before the board and we'll discuss it. In the past, there have been times I've brought members of the advisory committee with me to provide a little additional input. And again, typically what we try and do is we try and make Benton County's policy and Franklin County's policy kind of one and the same, so that we don't want to end up in a situation where we have a Franklin County vet that says, well, they allow this service in Benton County, and why can't I get it just because I live in a different county? And so all of the services, the only difference in the two policies, and it's something I think I'll have to address with Benton County, is I think they have eligibility of 11 advisory board members, and Franklin County is 7. 11 is too many. I think 7 is a good number, and so it makes it difficult at times to have a quorum if we're going to vote on anything when we got so many people. And so it's, in some cases, the more people, it just kind of convolutes things. And so I think that will be the only pitch that I have. And then the policies would be the same.
With 11, how many did you have to have with the quorum for a quorum?
6.
You have to have 6?
Yeah.
Well, what happened? Who breaks the tie vote if there's a tie vote?
I'll be on, well, I'd have to look at the bylaws. But
just gonna say,
but I'll
usually-
tell you, I don't think we've ever had a situation where we've had a vote that's not been unanimous.
Okay.
It's we have a good discussion about it, and if there's issues that come up, then really the advisory board members are great. They they really want what's best for the veteran, and they advocate for additional services, additional benefits, and so. There's sometimes I kind of reel them back and say, well, I spoke with legal and this isn't something we can do. So it's well-intentioned, but we don't have the ability to do it.
So you're looking at the revenue there, we're way up there,
We are.
and we're only supposed to have 3 years. And we could suspend this for a year and then reconvene it. What would you say to that?
What I would say is I think and I don't like this fund growing. This is one of the funds that you want to be spending what you make, and then some, maybe to when you have a reserve like we have, and so I think there will be some things that we're looking at, and historically, because of the other programs that I oversee, when we have a veteran that comes in and they're behind on their rent. Rent is an allowable expense with this, but I have other state-funded programs, state or federal-funded programs that we can assist with rent. And so 9 times out of 10, we're gonna take that veteran and help them with one of those programs. And to a degree, maybe, we'll still continue to do that, but I think maybe there needs to be a little bit more of a balance, because I think when we do that all the time, and then this fund just continues to grow, that's not a good thing either. And although this is local money, and so I'd rather spend state money than local money. But I think there are some things that we can do by increasing the benefit. And without getting into detail with it, there will very likely be an ask for a second VSO, in moving into next year. And so I think there will be some things that we can do to better spend our dollars. And again, taking in consideration that I still want to use state funding if I have the choice. And so I think that's, you know, we have had a lot of, even though COVID has been winding down, our COVID funding, we still have had more funding, more state dollars than we had prior to COVID. It's like, and it's not even close. It's you know, we had our Consolidated Homeless Grant, which has, it's a grant from Commerce, which is the primary funder for our office. Prior to COVID, you know, it was a $2 million grant. Now it's about $6 million a year. So
Tripled.
it's big. Now I don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
You know, we'll get our budgets. I'll know what that contract looks like probably in April. And so, you know, I anticipate we probably won't have that same level of funding. You know, one issue that we've run into with our housing, our local housing programs, is when interest rates went up. You know, when interest rates are low, everyone refinances, and it's based off of a doc recording fee, and so our revenues were like crazy through the roof. Interest rates go up, and Commerce originally predicted that we'd see about a 30% decrease in revenue. No, it's like 65% decrease in revenue. And so Lisa and I are actually going to meet next week because there are programs historically we've supported with our doc recording fees. Internally, we've transitioned most of those people into our state programs just to protect the local dollars because they're more flexible. We can do different things with them. And I think there are contracts. We contract some of those dollars out too. And so, for example, you know, we support operations for our domestic violence shelter and our youth shelter. We also have housing dollars that we provide to other providers. You know, I feel pretty strongly about protecting our contracts for our shelters, but some of those we're going to have to sit down and have some hard discussions about, okay, these are all good programs, but we don't have the same level of funding that we had previously, and so we're going to have to cut some of those, and so that's what we get to do next week, so we'll have to see. We've tried to decrease our spending in our local programs, housing programs, kind of gearing up for, you know, if we don't get the same level of state funding in our contracts, you know, that expire in June. So, but there are some. Sorry, I'm kind of all over the place. I think with regard to the vet program, I think there will be some things that we're looking at doing in 25. Again, potentially adding another VSO. And then maybe increasing the benefit, and then we'll sit down and take a look, and maybe there needs to be some balance between, you know, the assistance that we provide the veterans in this program versus some of our state housing programs, and you know, we can look at that and see if again, because I know the optics of a fund like this growing aren't great. It's you want to be spending the dollars, but again, we want to try and balance that with, okay, well, if we've got state money that we can use, we want to use that.
Eric, did you have a question?
Yeah, so Kyle, I think we looked at the statute. I'm just trying to come up with the understanding of this 3-year, of you have to have 3 years of maybe what you're assessing in. Do you know the statute well enough to know the fund balance requirements, or?
I don't. I know both Benton and Franklin County take the minimum amount, and it's but I'm not familiar. I know the statute's very brief. There's not a lot to it, and I think to a degree they do that intentionally to allow local jurisdictions to be flexible in how they administer those dollars. But I'm not familiar with the 3-year. I would have to look at the statute again.
You poke around. I looked at it briefly during the meeting, and there was a couple of convoluted elements that I'm not sure I fully, so.
I will look at it and.
Yep.
Kyle, I'm sorry, have you met?
Yeah, we did meet. We had a
Good.
chance to meet. Yep.
Yeah, it was great. I put some time on his calendar, and I told him I heard nothing but good things about him, but I hadn't had an opportunity to put face to name, and so we had a great conversation here a couple of weeks ago.
So we're under some tight time limits here. Are we done with veterans?
We are done.
Okay.
And I can be as in-depth or as brief as you need. You give me an opportunity and I'll just start talking, and Lisa won't kick me under the chair like some of my other employees do. I
think it would be good, though, just, to intentionally get to us a kind of a date certain when you think you will have the ability for the board to look at new contributions for veterans in the categories. So.
Okay. So ending homelessness, this is one half of our, well, I guess it's not half, it's more than half, but it's one part of our local program supported with document recording fee. And so when documents are recorded in the county, a portion of those, of course, the state takes their portion, and then a portion goes into our this is ending homelessness, but it's also referred to as the homeless housing fund, and then other dollars that are, and the homeless housing fund is geared more towards providing services to help fill gaps in our that maybe the state doesn't cover. The other part of the fund is in our affordable housing fund, and it is geared towards capital expenses. And so we've tried to cut back spending in this program, kind of waiting to see how the interest rates play out. We've had some of these people that we have long-term programs that we've generally left untouched. We have a mental health housing program, a disabled housing program that are we provide a long-term rental subsidy for people that are either disabled or have a mental health condition. And in those situations, we require that the participant pay 30% of their income, and then we'll cover the remainder of the rent. Quite frankly, all of these individuals are on disability. And so, their income hovers around $1,000. And so they would pay $300 and change to their rent, and if their rent were $1,000, then we would cover $700 of that and make sure that they stay enrolled in their mental health services and without kind of droning on, the one when we developed this program. So my background. I started with the county back in '97 when we operated crisis services, mental health crisis services, and so I worked for 20 plus years as a mental health professional. And so when I transitioned into this role, the first person we put in our mental health housing program, it was a person that I actually met on the psych hospital out at Lourdes. I was out evaluating someone else, and he was out there. This was a person that over the course of, 15 years had, it was in the hundreds, contacts with law enforcement. He had 45 inpatient psych hospitalizations. You list off all of these visits to the ER, and no one would rent to him. He was, law enforcement they wouldn't respond to him individually because he would always fight. He was a guy with bipolar disorder. And so we put him in the program. He ended up having to live at a hotel because no one would rent to him, but he was a PACT member, and PACT is a high intensity service that Lourdes Counseling Center operates, and it's for people that have had historic problems staying engaged in treatment. And part of the problem is they never knew where he was at. And so when we put him in the program, he's in the program for 5 years, and he died of natural causes. But during that 5 years, he had one psych hospitalization, and he had medical issues. So he had 3 or 4 medical admissions. And so I think these types of programs where you provide a rental subsidy and require that they participate in treatment and their providers know where they're at, they work. So that's my spiel on the success of those kinds of programs. So not much to that, to the rest of this. We've, like I said, we have programs that we still have dollars budgeted to, but right now we don't have people in them. And again, we're gonna sit down next week and talk about, we gotta iron out what we're gonna be able to contract out before we put more people in the programs. But it's just balancing the decrease in revenue with being able to continue to provide services, so. Any questions on?
Thank you.
Yeah.
No. Thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah. And so want to move on to the homeless, affordable housing fund? That's the 18089?
Yep.
Okay. And so I'll tell you this is the second part of the doc recording fees. And I've simply not been able to administer this program. Prior when, and I'd had a conversation with Mike, and perhaps maybe we need to have a longer, maybe Eric and I need to have a little bit longer conversation about this. This is a program that requires an interlocal with the cities in the county and the county. And so last year, I had gone around, presented to all the city councils, looking at renewing the interlocal. The interlocal was about to expire. There were actually a couple of them. They asked me to come back and present a second time. Pasco was one of them. And Pasco had some issues with signing the interlocal, and they ended up not signing it. They had some concerns about the county administering funding the city. It was just kind of this long drawn out discussion. And so right now, I can't do anything with this program. So after a couple of city council meetings, I had reached out to the city, made a couple attempts to meet with the city manager, and was unsuccessful. And so then I reached out to Mike, because I knew his ties to the city, and said, hey, here's what's going on. Can you help create a meeting? Because this fund is just sitting here. There's no dollars being spent because by statute, we have to have an interlocal.
Does it have to be with Pasco, or is this something we could work with Con-El on right now?
So it's an interlocal with all of the cities. So I had all of the cities in. I had Con-El, Mesa, Colota, and Clotis, and they all had signed off on the interlocal. And so again, the majority of the funding comes from the city of Pasco.
So you
and
gotta
so
have
I have
Pasco.
to have Pasco as part of the interlocal, and so then. Mike left the county's employment, and so this has just kind of fallen flat. And so, and part of it's on me. I've not reached back out to the city in the last few months, and so I'll re-engage with that. But I think at this point now, because the other cities signed last year, I'll likely have to redo the whole thing. And so there will be it's a process to get. And the cities were all great. Even when I presented to the Pasco City Council, they were great. There was one person that had some issues. That person is no longer on the city council, so I don't know if those issues are still there. But I have. Please know that I have made attempts to talk to the city, and I've just not been successful in being able to meet with them and iron out whatever their concerns are. So that will be more to come on that.
Could you quickly talk about where the revenue for this program comes from? And then secondarily, what are the lost opportunities right now because not having an interlocal?
So revenue comes from this is doc recording fee, and it's not an equal portion. The Affordable Housing Fund and the Homeless Housing Fund, the Homeless Housing Fund, which was the one we just talked about, probably takes three quarters of the revenue generated goes into that fund. The remainder goes into this. This is the other one where we have a steering committee that guides spending, and so the focus is on capital capital projects. And this was the fund that supported the land purchase for Bishop's Gilstead Commons. And so we have a steering committee that's made up of representation from the cities and the county. And and typically what we do is we meet each year. Now, we didn't meet last year, because at the time, we don't have an interlocal, so we can't administer the funds. And so, but typically what will happen is each year, usually at the beginning of the year, I'll meet with the steering committee, provide them with a fund balance and say, is this something that, are you wanting me to issue an RFP? And for how much? And there have been times when we've had $150,000 in the fund, and they said, no, let's let it build for a few years, and then we'll issue a big RFP. And so then if say we have, over $700,000, say we issue an RFP for $500,000, then my office, we advertise in the paper, we'll put it on the website, that we're soliciting applications for this funding for capital projects, and we list off all the requirements of applications. And so then, when we set an end date, we go through the applications after that date has closed, and we make sure that all of the applications are in line with the RCW, which serves households that are at or below 50% AMI. And then again, there has to be the tie-in to fair market rent as determined by HUD. Anyone, we also put in the information packet that if there is an award in excess of $100,000, we put a 15-year restrictive covenant on the property to make sure that it's used accordingly to how, to what they say they're doing. And if they sell the property at any point, they have to return the full dollar amount. Anytime within that 15 years. After 15 years, it's no longer, the county no longer has an investment in that. They've done what we've told them to do or what we've asked them to do. And so then if we say we've got 4 projects, I'll schedule an afternoon with the steering committee, and the applicants will come and present their projects to the steering committee, and the steering committee makes recommendations on which projects to fund, and then I bring them before the board, explain them to you, and you decide whether you want to authorize me to go into contract with them or not. That's how the program works, and again, typically I usually meet with the steering committees in January. Obviously, that's not gonna happen this year, and I'll try and push that meeting.
Well, we gotta get this interlocal agreement put together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really the important part. If I look at the projection here, by the end of 2025, we'll have $750,000 that could be going towards the types of activities you are talking about, so.
Yeah, and the great thing about these funds is I think no one will argue the fact that we have a shortage of affordable housing in it's a national crisis, but it's certainly in Eastern Washington and a Franklin County crisis, and that's what these funds are to support projects for affordable housing. And so it's nice to be able to get those dollars out. And I'll work on again, I've not reached out to the city in a couple of months. I'll try and make those connections again, and I'll keep the board appraised of how that's coming, and hopefully we can get some of this stuff ironed out and do an RFP in early 25.
I'll add it to my list to talk to the city manager too.
Great, I would appreciate that.
All right, well, thank you.
All right. That was pretty easy, guys. I'm gonna like coming over here. It's I used to get kind of drilled, and so
That ain't getting no more of that happening right now.
kind of nice.
We appreciate what you're doing.
Thanks, I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank you. So are we recessing for the day?
I don't know, I just texted my wife, but she hasn't let me know whether they're on time or not on time, but,
What's the total ask?
I don't think there is an ask.
I mean, these funds are not in current expense, so they really,
We just come
money in, money out.
yeah, it's money in, money out.
Yeah. And it sounds like that veterans fund.
And they're different ones. mean, veterans the most interesting one, where we're bringing in 210 is what's projected, I think, and 150 in expenditure, something like that.
Be better off to give the
So-
money to the veterans than hiring somebody to administrate it, because that would hire
That's what the
somebody.
VSO is, a Veteran Service Officer.
Do they
and-
volunteer or they get
No, they're
paid?
No,
paid.
they get paid.
Yeah, they're paid.
But they're a veteran too.
Okay,
So they're veterans helping veterans.
all right.
And it's well worth it because, and these guys know, because if you fill out your form wrong, you're done. You don't get a second chance. These guys they gotta
Yeah.
help them fill their forms out right the first time.
And, you know, Kyle's right. I mean, the VSOs, and we've worked hard to try and get a VSO in every county, is the goal really is we may actually use less of the county money because we are leveraging
Federal and
state
state.
and federal.
And that's what he said. He's got
that's-
so much
And that's
coming
really
in.
this interesting dynamic about, the other thing that was really an interesting kind of that illuminated me, that was such a shock, is that there are so many veterans who think there are other veterans that need these resources more. So
Yep.
they don't actually come in for them.
They're
They,
just
they.
unselfish.
They are unselfish. They say, oh, there's other people that need these dollars more, so they don't even come in. And the veteran service officer particularly is really helping them understand these are dollars that are available to you, both at now our local level, because we're clearly not spending them all, and the state and federal is the same way. And so that's been one of the really, for me, one of the almost transformational kind of ahas, is that's one of the big benefits of having a county veteran service officer, is helping the veterans themselves understand and realize that not just helping them access those, but helping them understand they shouldn't, you know.
They
shouldn't be-
deserve it.
They deserve it, and they shouldn't be ashamed to take them.
That's right.
Yeah, I agree.
It would be neat to have, I think he said John Penny is the new administrator. Have him come in and share with us.
Yeah.
He's gonna.
And I think that's what our plan is, to get them in front of you all.
Yes. And then even bring in Tucker Flood.
Is he, I was trying to catch up there, is he looking for people to sit on the Veterans Advisory Board?
No,
I
he's
don't-
got them. They just gotta get them to us to okay.
Yeah, I think they have
And-
them now.
And Scotty Smiley's still gonna be involved. That's why I
Oh,
asked,
great.
is Scotty
Okay.
still gonna be involved? Because he's a veteran, blinded. That's Tiffany Smiley's.
There's a couple of veterans that I know that would be.
Yeah, that'd be good. We need as many of them to participate as possible. But I asked the question about discontinuing the tax, but we could bring it back on, just seeing what his,
That's 210 a year?
Yeah, I don't think where you think you can discontinue it. I think our goal might be is to utilize,
yes.
if it's in fund balance and it came from property tax, can we return it to current expense property tax? I think you
Yes.
still have to levy it, I think, if I look at the statute.
Well, you don't discontinue it, you just suspend it for a year and then bring it back online again. You
I
just
don't
give that's what I was told you can do.
I don't know, I'd have to look at the statute more closely. I thought it
Yeah.
really says the county shall levy, so.
Well, I'm all for it. If we can use it, you damn right, we need it.
But I know that, I mean, I've sat in a lot of the advisory committee meetings too, and, I mean, one of the questions that I've wondered too, and I think it's been looked at and stuff, but, you know, as Kyle was talking about, increasing amounts and stuff, but also, I think, you know, once again, we need to continue looking out at other counties and other things to see if there's anything missed as far as that we can support, that we should add into the policy. Are there other allowable activities that we're
Right.
missing?
Well, I really appreciate what Eric said. What if we were to look into Connell and say, is there a way to do some service up there?
Yeah, have an outreach office that's available, or, you know, at least on a, you know, once a week or once every other week basis, they're in the rural communities.
The last fund we talked about that, we haven't got the interlocal agreement on, I think that's one that could be used up at Connell. But Pasco didn't sign on to it.
They had some turmoil before this current council.
Yeah, I know.
I would encourage him to reach out to them quickly and
Do you want to try to tackle anything here on the commissioner and county administrator?
I think the only thing for me in the commissioner's budget, honestly, is, and, you know, I've talked a little bit individually. is our FTEs, is looking, we have, we've got the FTEs of 5 positions. You have the county administrator. We've now moved the OPD position away from the government relations position. You have a civil service position. That position's now hired, and we have 2 vacancies. And so, for me, as I do the analysis, I've talked to Teresa, I've talked to Shirley. The question is, for me, we've offloaded the OPD functions of one of the executive assistant position, which was a large function, at least while I was here. Now, I don't know if that was historically like that, but that was certainly a large function. And so whether or not you have the capacity, and whether you can, and whether or not you are shortchanging yourselves, or whether you need to wait for a new county administrator to determine and at least at this point provide, move that to a single position and look at the position descriptions and the core functions, and are certainly the Board of Equalization, and being the liaison for the Board of Equalization, the clerk for that. Certainly providing accounts payable and accounts receivable, and doing payroll, and doing those functionalities. And then supporting, perhaps supporting the county administrator as well. But you do lose some functionality in perhaps what the position had been utilizing it for. It's nothing that I have utilized it for, but certainly there's a lot of things, for example, maybe at HAPO that I could have offloaded to an executive assistant type position. But I think that's one of the questions from a potential budget savings perspective, is you at least for the start of the fiscal year, you actually do not, you combine those two. When you have a new county administrator, they're able to go through, they may want a project assistant or something. They may want not something that's really focused on the administrative support function, but more doing project analysis that can go and look at that, support you on projects or activities. There's several things you all have come to me when we're working with the Corps of Engineers, having someone that could look at a Corps of Engineers and look at how do you go about doing those types of applications or something. So I think my suggestion, and I take it cautiously, because I don't think you can continue to ask your administrative support staff to do more.
Right.
However, we have done a major piece in moving the important piece of public records off of that position. Do you free up the capacity to meet the core functions that the office has to perform? But you still would be very lean within the administrator's office. I joke about walking over to Benton County, but if you walk the hallway from, of the administrator's office, they have a budget person, they've got a risk manager, they've got, a projects person, they have a administrator, a deputy administrator, a clerk of the board. It looks a lot different walking that hallway than what you have as an administrative support to support the Board of County Commissioners. So I think that's my only thing that I wanted to be able to talk to you about. It's something you don't need an answer to, but it's as we move forward, it's something that to be thinking about.
Okay.
And I'm really cognizant, and I appreciate Teresa. She's holding down the fort right now, and really talking to her about it, that position would also then serve as a deputy clerk of the board, and so you would have a deputy clerk of the board and a backup as well. Most counties have at least a deputy clerk of the board, so that, like last week, we were fortunate that we could bring Shirley back, and Shirley, came up to speed quickly on putting the civic clerk and the things in. So, and IT and IS folks were very beneficial to us as well. But I think that's the only thing from a staffing perspective and the FTE perspective, which is I think the most significant part of the commissioner's budget components that I wanted guidance on.
Yeah, it's an overall, as submitted, it's an overall decrease of $3,630, which includes, part of what that includes is, currently it's in addition of public records officer, and then removing the government affairs position is what's being submitted as far as salaries and benefits right now. But, as Eric's mentioning, that's ultimately up to the
And
board
I'm,
what they want to, how.
you
they
know, and
wanna
I'm
move.
really cognizant. I mean, you have a fiscal crisis, and there's a part of me that wants to be able to demonstrate, and this is your choice, but to demonstrate the board's doing its own analysis and its own look of its own expenditures, and its FTEs that drives a lot of our costs. So, but that doesn't mean that's a good long-term solution once you have a new county administrator and they look at what staffing needs are for to support the board.
And there were some other minor changes. There was some movement between lines and stuff, but overall, there wasn't a ton of activity. And ultimately, an
I would say the
overall
biggest
decrease.
surprise to me, and we just really carried forward the budget a lot, and you all can choose this thought, but the travel for commissioners is almost non-existent.
We're trying to lead by example.
Yep, I understand that, but there are times when, Franklin County doesn't, it's not an island. You are part of a larger region and ultimately a state, and I'm not suggesting you start traveling nationally at all, but there are a lot of counties that do, that do that. So I think I would at least think about, I know a trip to Olympia from here probably doesn't take very long till it's $1,000 trip.
Well, that's why I think that Stevens serving on that should probably be taking some trouble. But myself,
Yeah.
if I'm going up north, I'll just pay for it myself.
right.
I don't need to expense the county if I can afford it myself.
And I think that's fine for you. The next commissioner after you may not have
Exactly.
the capabilities to do
right.
that either. So just because it might be there doesn't necessarily mean you have to expend it or utilize it too. So I don't know, I just think that would be one area that I think you probably should at least think about. Do you have a role at any time? Do you want to go to, for lack of a better term, you see a water conference. It's really interesting. Water's a huge issue for this area, both for agriculture, municipal, and industrial. If you see something that piques your interest, you have resources to be able to go and, and learn. Those are types of things that you might think about as well. But definitely, the position and travel would be the only two that I think really jump out at me to say, you might ponder those things.
I think in the past, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was 5,000 each. And Clint lowered his to 0, and I think I lowered mine to 500. 1,000. And then
Yeah, there's two for 1,000 and one doesn't have any. I'd have to look back historically to see what it was.
That
at
represents,
least the money would be there, even though we don't spend it. Because Commissioner Bauman has made several trips to
Yes.
Olympia.
yeah, so this represents, that's one trip, and that's being really, really lean. And I believe that I went 7 times on behalf of the county. Once was to the Wasatch Conference and the different things, but one thing I think that we should think about, and I appreciate Eric's perspective on this, is in talking about the Corps of Engineers, and that specifically talking about economic development for Franklin County. And so a question that I have, and I don't know, I'm getting more and more up to speed on it, but our economic development funds, we can do advertising, there's quite a few things that we can do with that. Is a portion of a position available to be paid for from that? And the reason why I asked that is you talked about a projects assistant or something of that nature. And that's something that I've noticed for years, and we're the fastest growing county, except for our fastest growing county is not for the county, it's for everything else. And so it's something I think that we should consider and talk about, because we need likening it to the power grid, we need solid base load power. Well, we need solid base, tax base, and that's, industrial business, commercial business and that type of thing. And to hopefully, relieve some of that pressure from our rural areas. And, have had a number of businesses approach me, and as Eric has come, I've had him, we're meeting with somebody tomorrow, kind of having a working lunch and having that conversation. And another component of that, when we talk about projects, is the grant funding side of it. I have hat in hand asked our state and national legislators to help me understand the process and help me learn it. Well, bless their hearts, they have sent me opportunities, and I simply don't have the bandwidth to be able to do it all. And I think that if there's a grant available, that we should go after it if we can, and think that we should figure out, is there a way to do that? Last year with the efforts that myself and Jason and Mike put in, that we were able to, get that $3 million grant for the HAPO Center. And I'm not saying that that's going to be regular or normal, but certainly if we don't ask, we're not going to get it anyway.
Yeah, it's funny you talk about that. I was actually thinking about that more in relationship to HAPO, which is an economic development in many regards as well. The statute provides for funding of an economic development office, and what is it called? Personnel in economic development offices. Economic development office means an office of a county, port district, or an associate development organization is defined in our city, which promotes economic development purposes within the county. So I actually had thought about that maybe being, something you could be thinking about. I know there's a lot of people already engaged in economic development, and maybe that just convolutes it more, but that would be something you could be thinking about as well. And
That would be paid out of the .09
you'd
fund?
use it out of .09. Again, you'd have to do that in consultation with the city and the port, but yeah, that would be the some type of potential. So I think there's just a lot of things that are going on in relationship to economic development for you, including I've always been, I think Commissioner, I know Commissioner Bauman has heard me say this, is that one of your core responsibilities is to understand what your purpose is in economic development and being clear about that. I've always believed that making sure you have public infrastructure and making sure you have a good comprehensive plan and you have a good permitting system, those are really three very tangible things that you can do as a county government to support economic development.
We need to improve the third one of
So
those.
all three of those are they're all very, very important. In the
last one
the permitting process is critical, in making sure you've got both the process and the people then to implement the permitting process.
So, Stephen, I know you reported on that one road, the crossing on Road 78,
76.
76. Is there any plans for something out here on
Yes.
Highway 12? We have got
Yes.
to, before that Amazon gets too busy. That's
So it is,
Cloverleaf out there?
the A Street and Highway 12 intersection, that intersection will likely move to the south, and that is one of the top 6 projects
Is it a Cloverleaf?
to be determined. So this is an example of where that I think that we need to be proactive as a county, because that impacts us too.
Oh, yeah.
And if we were to have somebody to help us with economic development /projects /grants, I don't know if there is this Swiss Army knife, but if there was, that's something that right now that person would be working overtime in preparation, because our legislators want to help us. I know they do. They are almost all of them. I have asked them to come and sit tomorrow night or tomorrow evening as soon as we're done here over at CCOM. They're all coming and going to be our audience to present some of this challenge that we have in front of us right now. And they want to help us, but we also have to go ask, and we have to do the components of saying, this is what we're asking for. We can't just go say, give us money, because
No, they should be leading the charge on this emergency radio for the state that we're all
trying to, yep, absolutely.
So Eric, how you doing? Did you get a response?
Yep, the doctor was not there yet, so.
Well, I'm encouraged by that. I think that's something that we should be looking at. And in fact, that's what we were trying to do with our last person that we had hired that is no longer here, was gonna be the grant person and getting in touch and aware and applying for.
We did begin the project, the process well. I was, there was, you know, there was, I was starting from scratch, and so was he, and so, but that's fine. We were making some headway, and for us to be able to bring home that grant for HAPO, I can tell you specifically that was because of him and I walking one specific day. We walked our legs off. We were there before 7 a.m. and I think we walked as hard as we could and ate lunch while we're walking. And that day is why we got that. And if we had not been there, that would not have happened.
Now, is that pretty much a guaranteed grant, or is that suspect to
It is in the
21?
capital budget.
It is done,
It is in the capital budget. I have been, I mean, you
but the
go, you
budget
could go.
hasn't been passed.
No, the 24 budget,
It
it's
was in the
there.
capital. Okay.
So I suppose there's ways that they could take it, but if you go look it up in the Department of Commerce, it's there.
Okay. Because 2117 is how it's being funded.
Yeah,
I've-
I do think it's conditioned, but I would say once, regardless if it passes or not, they will have to come back and amend
Yeah.
a capital budget. They do an annual budget amendment, so, yeah. So until we have it under contract, and even once you have it under contract, they always put the language still subject to
Yep.
appropriation and reappropriation, et cetera, so. But I do think, I think you have to be very clear, if you fund with this money, it promotes economic development purposes, and in .09 money has been under a lot of scrutiny, so I think you would be very narrowly focused, a position description, and then, a set of goals and actions for them to perform that meets the statutory definition.
And I think you're the right guy to have us in here to get that done.
So, okay, something for us to think about then. as well.
Yes.
Did you have anything else in the budget, on the commissioner's budget that you wanted to talk about?
No, I was just, the last thing I was going to say was, one of the commissioners asked about the travel, what it was previously. I believe it was Commissioner Mullen. Last year's budget, it was, in the 2023 budget, it was 5,000 for each commissioner.
What about the commissioner car allowances? Where are we at on that? That's been neglected, or is it gone?
It is at 10,800
It is, okay.
total for the three.
So we're still receiving that?
I believe only, if I remember from looking at it before, I believe only two of the commissioners
Yeah.
have been receiving it.
Yeah, I'm not receiving that either.
Yeah.
Okay.
But the amount that's on there is for all three receiving it, but I believe only two have been receiving it.
Okay.
Can we start tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.?
Yep. And if we could, if there's nothing to cover on Friday, I'd like to conclude tomorrow so Eric can get back home, and then we will have our workshop on the next meeting, which we can go through.
That sounds good to me.
Yes.
Okay. Commissioner Bauman, are you all right with?
Yeah, I was just reading here. Yeah, if we can not.
All right, so at this point, we will recess until tomorrow.
Yep.
Okay, thank you all.
Yep, thank you.
Nobody in here tonight either?